and welcome to part one of this series. I've gotten a lot of requests to do drawing tutorials, and this specific series has been on my to-do list for a very long time. I've been putting it off just because it's kind of a big project. This series is meant to take you step by step through my whole drawing process from start to finish. So if you're drawing alongside me throughout these videos, by the end you should have your own full character drawn. We're not going to get into coloring or rendering in this series. We're going to keep it pretty simple, and we're just going to talk about sketching and then maybe inking, but coloring will be down the road. We'll talk about that later. But I hope some of you will find this series helpful and maybe even fun, and I would love to see your drawings at the end if you do choose to draw alongside me. My goal is just to have some of you gain something useful out of this series. So this is part one. This is meant to serve as the intro, the sort of behind the scenes for my drawing process, kind of just to showcase how I prep and plan for my drawings, just because this part of the drawing process does play a pretty significant role in the overall process. I do just want to preface that this whole series, this is not a how to draw series. This is specifically how I draw. None of these videos are going to be like the overall rules for art. There are actually some rules in art and drawing, I know, which is crazy, that I don't follow. If you're just looking to learn how I draw specifically and you want to know the process, this is the series for you. So again, this specific video, we're just going to talk about the prepping and planning that I do for every drawing, because every drawing does have a very rough sketch behind it, which is one of my favorite things to go back and look at, because sometimes you can't even decipher what it is compared to the final product, but my brain can decipher it. And I think it's kind of important to have that part of the process, because it's really where you get your first idea down and you are planning things and trying to figure out whether or not what is in your brain can be translated onto paper. Here are a few examples actually of some of the sketch to finish pieces. It's a really hilarious comparison. Again, some of them you can't really decipher super well, some of them are a little bit clearer. It just depends on how clear the vision is in my head when I'm doing it, and how complicated the idea is. You know, if it's super complicated, I'm not going to be adding a lot of those details to the beginning sketch, because who has time for that, or the patience? But if it's a pretty simple, just like character bust or something, you know, it's pretty easy to figure out what I have planned for that. And sometimes there really is no planning sketch, it's just jumping straight into the character sketch. Again, it really just depends on the complexity of the piece. Now, a big part of why I think this process works so well for me is because I have spent a lot of time in the past doing gesture drawing, life drawing. I did take a couple art classes in college. I took an art class obviously in like high school, and those classes always make you do gesture drawing, which is a lot of fun, honestly. And I really do implore you to take some time and practice, because I do think it has had a significant impact on my ability to draw flowy pieces, to have a lot of movement in my characters, and also it's helped a lot with proportions, which is funny because most of the time with gesture drawing or this type of sketching, you're not really worrying about proportions, you're not worrying about the finer details. But doing enough of this type of drawing has helped me figure out proportions, and has helped me get better at the finer details, which is funny. Now, I'm not going to get into the fundamentals of gesture drawing, like talking about the line of action or any of the actual rules behind this type of drawing. However, I will link a few videos in the description that I think are very helpful if you're interested in learning about gesture drawing properly. But this is just how I do it, because I've done it so many times, and this is what works for me and what helps me get in the headspace of the piece that I'm working on. This is mainly where I just do, like I said, the planning for the drawing and sort of the thumbnail if I'm planning on including any background or additional characters. But that's pretty much it. I think I'm done talking your ear off, so let's get to it. I do also want to say that this whole series, while I am working on my iPad, you can do it traditionally. I'm just using my iPad because it's what I have and it's a little bit easier to use when I'm like teaching or explaining things. So if you only have a pencil and paper, that's absolutely fine. If you're using paint, that's also fine. Whatever you have is going to be totally fine. Now, as the first video in this series, this is probably going to be pretty short, just because the main thing that I want to focus on is just figuring out what you want to draw. Now, if I'm having trouble thinking of a pose, I do usually like to use Pinterest. However, I do highly encourage you to spend some time practicing poses, getting comfortable with the initial sketch phase, and then you won't need to rely on it so much. Hopefully you should be able to pull some poses from your own imagination and it'll feel a little bit more effortless, if that makes sense. Now for this series specifically, I know that I want to do just a pretty simple, straightforward standing pose. So I'm only going to be sketching some standing poses just to keep on theme and make things a little bit easier. I'm also using the 6B pencil and I have the size turned up pretty high here just because we're not worried about details at all right now. The only thing that we're worried about right now is figuring out pose, movement, things like that. So let's get sketching. So before I really open up Pinterest, I think I'm going to start just with my brain and just get the creative juices going. So the first thing I always start with is a circle, obviously for the head. And then you probably see a lot of artists do this little cross situation here. This is going to be your face. So imagine an eyeball here and an eyeball here. That's going to help determine which way your face is going, and then I kind of just do this little rounded triangle at the bottom, and that's my head. That is absolutely the max amount of details that we're going to be doing today. So once you have your head, we're going to do a little neck, and again, nothing needs to be nice here, nothing needs to be detailed. Don't worry about proportions, don't worry about literally anything. None of this is gonna look nice. So, oops. Gonna draw a little box here for the torso. This is gonna be like the top part of the torso here just before it meets the hips. I'm gonna imagine the hips are right here. So we've got two sections. It definitely helps to make each section of the body just a block. That can make things a little bit easier. But to be honest, even that is a little bit more detailed than I like to get. So the arms, we're not going to worry about anything. We're just going to bring them down like this and pretend that those are the hands. I have drawn this a little bit too big, so we're going to shrink it up a little bit. And we're just going to draw some legs here. Those are the feet. Again, as detailed as it's going to get. And that is it. So we're going to do a bunch of sketching just like this, just to get a feel for what kind of pose we're looking for. Let's shrink her down and move her. Let's go for another one. This time let's do a side profile. So we've got our head. Imagine the eye is right there. They're looking up. And here's where I'm going to get a little bit messier with the sketching. The looser you are, honestly, the better the sketch will turn out. Let's look like they're looking up at something. Maybe it's raining, I don't know. There's another one. Oops. I should have done these on their own separate layers. Let's move her up there. Let's think of another sketch. How about standing straight forward? So here are the eyes. Okay, well. How about hand on hip? And there's another one. She's pretty tall. But hey, some people are pretty tall. Okay, so there we've got 3 sketches did not use Pinterest, that's just from my brain. So let's go ahead and look at Pinterest now and see if there are any other interesting poses that we could try. Alright, I saw this one that I kind of liked, and I am gonna start a new layer here. So this one, oops. This one got their head kind of down like this with their eyes closed. And hands are behind their back. Torso is kind of forward. Legs are kind of back. I always draw way too big and then I never have enough room to finish the legs. There we go, I kind of like that one. That one's fun. Let's go for another one. Let's go for one with their head kind of this way. Really kind of slouchy. This hip is up higher. And once again, always way too big of a drawing. Calm down, Maddie. This foot is kind of forward. This foot is kind of back. And see, there's really nothing about this that screams proportionally accurate. But I bet you can at least tell that these are legs. As long as you can kind of tell the direction that you're going for, that's all you need. In the arms, I never worry about much. I kind of just make them little, very swoopy shapes. Okay, that was cute. I quite like this one, actually. And let's do one more. Right, I'm gonna draw a few more here, and in the meantime, I'm going to do a little voiceover. I kind of just want to talk about like this part of my process and why it's important, I think, for my overall art process. I think being comfortable with this planning stage is kind of vital for the overall picture of your final piece. Giving yourself the time to really sit down and look at the canvas and visualize what you want your piece to look like. It'll really help you in all the other stages of the drawing because, one, you're planning where things are going to go on your canvas, you're planning out composition. It can kind of help you save time in the long run because maybe you have this absolutely crazy idea in your head and you're thinking it's going to be great, it's going to look amazing. And you go to start putting it on your canvas and you're like, wait a minute, either this just doesn't make any sense like it did in my head, or maybe I'm not quite capable of drawing what I'm picturing. That happens to me a lot where I have this awesome idea, but I realize that my capabilities aren't quite there yet. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I shouldn't draw it, but it does kind of change the outcome of the drawing and it kind of changes the trajectory of my idea, which I think is helpful. Not that you should limit yourself. I don't think that you should think I'm not capable of drawing this and don't even bother trying. But if I have a very specific idea in mind and I want this piece to really represent my abilities, I will kind of take that into account. I also just think this part of the drawing process, not only is it a lot of fun, but being able to work quickly and get a lot of movement in your initial sketch can kind of help the result of the drawing. It can help your drawing stay flowy and look less stiff. I really think gesture drawing in general is super helpful if you are an illustrator who draws a lot of characters, obviously. So I really do recommend doing this often. I recommend maybe doing an exercise every day if you can, or at least once a week, where you put a time limit on your art. You sit down and say, okay, I'm going to do some gesture drawing, I'm just going to do some planning. You set aside your eraser. Try not to use your eraser. If you can avoid it altogether, that's perfect. If you need to use it a little bit here and there, that's fine. But try to avoid your eraser because we're not working on being perfect here. We're just trying to be quick. So set a timer for 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes, because the less time you have, obviously, the quicker you're going to move. And once you start drilling that into your brain, you're going to be a lot more comfortable with these movements. It's going to become muscle memory, and you're going to have a lot more fun with it. I also do really recommend Pinterest. You don't have to always think from your own brain. I know there are some other websites out there with good poses and even those little posable dudes that you can kind of use to come up with your own poses. I don't know any off the top of my head, but if I find some, I will link them in the description for you. I just know Pinterest, and usually I just search up pose reference and go from there. It is absolutely 100% okay to use reference when you are teaching yourself or when you are practicing. I think it is vital. Alright, so now I have quite a few poses that I've gone through and done. We have the first 3 that we did without any look on Pinterest, just to warm our brains up. I actually quite like these 3, but I don't think I'm gonna go with any of them. Then we have this one, which I also quite like. I like that there would be 2 hands in it. It's a little interesting. We have this one, which I also quite like. I'm a big fan of like 1 arm down, 1 up. I don't know why. We have this one, which I liked the idea of, but I wasn't really feeling it, and you can kind of tell here. This one, which I really like the idea of as well, but I don't think it's what I'm gonna go with for simplicity reasons. This one, which I also really quite liked, and I think I might go with. Then we have this one, which I feel like would be the best option. It's pretty easy, there's not a lot of complicated things going on. And then this one, which I really liked the idea of. In the reference photo, they had like a baggy sweater on and some baggy pants. I thought that would be kind of fun since it's wintry. But I think for the sake of simplicity, I'm gonna go with this pose. This just feels safe for a tutorial video and pretty easy to explain, so I also just kind of like this pose. It's very cute, simple, I like it. So this is the winner. So with that out of the way, the next step is going to be working on some details. We're going to get into the face. We're going to look at the eyes, the nose, the mouth, all that good stuff. But that will be in the next video. Right now, we were just getting our creative juices flowing, and I feel like I'm pretty warmed up and I'm ready for the next step. Hopefully you're feeling the same way. If not, I implore you to keep sketching. I highly recommend sketching with a time limit, looking at some pose references, maybe giving yourself 30 seconds to a minute and work on poses. I really suggest not erasing things, just letting your pen move, letting it do what it wants to do. That way you get comfortable with the movement, you get comfortable with working faster and not worrying about the little things. Hopefully, even though this video is short, it was helpful, and I will see you all in the next video to move on to the next steps. Bye-bye!